G'day survivors, in this video we're going to go over the very basics of the CPP C++ config file for DayZ modding and the different class categories we have to work with, and a high level overview of how they work. This one is more for beginner modders. If you're already experienced, you probably know most of this anyway and you can skip this video. But if you're new to modding, stick around, this is important. Let's go over the CPP file structure for DayZ mods. The CPP or C++ file config.cpp is where you tell the game engine all of the relevant config parameters for your mod and for objects and items and features defined within your mod. Ideally, you should be using the Bohemia Interactive DayZ Workbench to do all of this, but I've tried over the past 5 years many times to get this working. Dozens of attempts on 3 different computers. I cannot for the life of me get this thing to work without constantly crashing. The user interface doesn't work well on my 4K monitor. Everything is tiny, so I don't use the Workbench for scripting. You should use it. If you can get it to work, then God bless you. Congratulations. You are already a better DayZ modder than I am. But for me, I cannot get this freaking thing to work, so I don't use it. It infuriates me. So I'm going to be using Visual Studio to do most of my scripting or all of my scripting, which instantly puts me at a big disadvantage because I don't have access to the debug features of the Workbench scripting. There are tons of guides on YouTube on how to get this set up. If you join the DayZ Infusion Modders Discord, there's guides in there and people might help you get it set up. I'm not going to help you because I can't get it to work. I'm going to focus on Visual Studio. So here I have a template script folder. I'll have a link to this on GitHub. It's a pretty extensive template. It has a bunch of things in here that you're not going to use in every mod you make, but I wanted to make a general purpose mod template that you guys can take, and it has some code to get you started in. We'll go over all of the other features like 3D modeling, user inputs, sound effects, string tabling, user interface stuff, image sets, creating custom icons for slots, and all of that stuff in different videos. For this current video, I just want to focus on this CPP file, which will be in the root directory of your mod folder. So the typical workflow with a DayZ mod is you would create a folder, ideally on your P drive. If you don't know what a P drive is, Google it, and I'll have a video guide at some point on that as well. One thing that is very important to mention is that your directory, dir, needs to match your folder name or your scripts won't run or compile. So let me just quickly explain this section. So we have 3 scopes. There's actually more than 3, but these are the 3 main ones we would be using in most of our mods. 3 game, 4 world, 5 mission. 3 game is mostly config stuff and template code based templates. 4 world is where the majority of actions, items, interactable scripts happen. And 5 mission is mostly GUI stuff and very high level like gameplay code, key press stuff, that sort of thing. Your in-game inventory is all managed in 5 mission. How the GUI interacts with the world goes in there. We'll go over these in more detail in future lessons. All you really need to know is that anything that goes in 3 game cannot talk up to 4 and 5, but anything in 5 mission can speak to files in these scopes. So 5 mission can reference code that is put in 4 world and 3 game, but 3 game cannot reference code that is in 4 world or 5 mission. So these are all like a one-way street, starting with 5 mission and trickling down. That is the hierarchy of scopes. And you'll notice I have a common in here as well, a common file directory. This is optional. I like to include it in my scripts. All it does is have a define tag in here. Other modders can then use this to write code. This code will only compile if the definition exists. And so this is a great way to allow other modders to interact with your code base without requiring it as an explicit required add-on. Again, that's an advanced concept we'll go over in future videos. And this doesn't always work. There's issues with load order, PBO, mod load order, and all kinds of great fun things that we'll learn as DayZ modders through experience, trial and error, and plenty of frustration. But I'll do my best to walk you through some of the things that took me a long time to figure out. I recommend always including a define tag in your mods if possible. It does help streamline mod interactability and compatibility with your mods If you're creating your own server mod pack, there's a better way to go about this. You can create your own PBO file that's guaranteed to load before other mods do, but we'll get into that in a different video. If you are curious about the best technique for handling define tags, check out the source code to the expansion mods. They do a great job of structuring their defines. But anyway, that's all we really need to know about this part to get started. There's some other things here like our inputs XML, image sets. We'll go over these type of things in future videos in their own deep dive. So let's go over the basic structure of the CPP file. All of your DayZ items that are interactable and are not weapons will go in config vehicles. So anything that's wearable, clothing, gear, armor, melee weapons, tools, houses and static objects, all of those sorts of items will go under config vehicles. Now, don't let this name mislead you. Just because it has vehicles in it doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be a vehicle, although cars are defined within config vehicles. But any inventory item basically, or any interactable item that is not a weapon, goes in config vehicles. The majority of inventory items will inherit from inventory base, unless they're an edible or a consumable, bottle base, etc. Most generic items inherit from inventory base. That's why I left that in here. And because we have a semicolon here, we don't have to define what inventory base is every time we want to use it if it's already defined by the vanilla game files. We can just write this line of code here, and then anything I define here, like my custom item, and then I can do a colon here, inventory base. This custom item now inherits all of the parameters or characteristics of inventory base. And if I search class inventory base in AgentRansack and bring over the DayZ data patches, and we search for inventory base, these are all the parameters that get predefined when we inherit from this item. These are the default values of every item in the game, and we can obviously override these if we want to, and I will show you how to do that in a different video. But for now, that's all you really need to know about the CPP file when it comes to config vehicles. This is where we define inventory items. Config magazines is for weapon magazines, so pistol mags, rifle mags, automatic rifle mags, etc. And it works the same way as config vehicles, except that these class configs cannot speak to each other. So we can't inherit from class inventory base in config magazines because it was defined in config vehicles. So each scope of each config class or category is self-contained. What we would do here is magazine base, and we would inherit from here. My custom magazine inherits from magazine base, and then we inherit all of the characteristics of magazine base, and we can override them in here. This applies for every single config class in our CPP file. Weapons defines weapons, pistols, crossbows, anything that shoots ballistics or bullets or any kind of ammo. Config ammo is where you define what the effects of the ammo are. So for example, recently I put together this taser mod based on unused vanilla files. And if I come down on my config ammo, and we have config ammo types here as well. But if I come down to config ammo, bullet _ Zen taser inherits from the 22 round. And then I override all of the 22 rounds parameters to suit a taser projectile, and the damage the projectile does is 999 shock damage, but 0 health and blood damage. So this ammo type only deals shock damage or concussive damage and absolutely no health damage. So you can't kill anyone with this ammo type, but you can send them unconscious if you land a shot. Moving on, we have slots. So this is attachment slot config. Here's a little bit of an example template for adding a purification tablet slot. So for example, in a future video, I will show you how to add a chlorine tablet attachment slot to the canteen so that you can store your purification tablets directly on the canteen using this custom slot. Now, if the game files had a chlorine tablet slot already defined, I could just use that to add an attachment slot to an item. But if you want to add your own unique attachment slot, this is the basic setup. We'll go over this in more detail in a future video. We'll just stick to explaining each class category for now. Config non-AI vehicles is basically used for defining 3D attachment proxies. So you know when you're wearing a plate carrier and you attach a grenade to it and the grenade shows up on the vest, that 3D file is defined in here. And this should really say example slot. So this is quite advanced. The proxy attachment config, you won't be touching that for a while if you're brand new to modding, or at least you shouldn't until you have a better understanding of the other fundamentals of modding. But anyway, moving on, we then have our sound config. So these are the most commonly used config categories in my experience and from other mods I've studied. There are a bunch of other ones that I won't go over, probably ever, because for example, we have config worlds where you can define a lot of the map config for the skybox and things like that. That's quite advanced compared to what the average modder wants to do. So we won't be covering that in this series, but these are the most commonly used ones. And to wrap up this little crash course on what all these different categories are, we have sound shaders and sound sets. So the best way to think of this is the sound shaders are config definitions of your file. So the file path, the volume of the file, and things to do with the file itself. And if you're not aware, if you're going to add sounds to your mods, you need to use the OGG audio file type. I'll show you how to do that in a future video using Audacity, which is a free audio editing program. It's really easy to use, really easy to do. But this is where you would define your file path. You can actually have multiple samples in here if you wanted to have, you know how when you fire a gun, it plays a random gunshot sound with some variance in each shot. You could have several different files here within the same sound shader, and then when you play that sound shader in game, it will just pick a random sound from that list. So here's where you define your sounds, and then here is where you define how these sounds in game. So how your audio file sounds in game. So this template base sound set is a copy of the base character sound set, and I'm not going to go over what all these different processing parameters do because it's a whole deep dive of its own. All you really need to know is that if we had a sound file with this name in our mod folder and we played this sound set, it would play that sound file with this volume and these audio effects applied. Now, a few other things I want to go over. At the top of this file, we have some general modding info just for my own reference. When I'm adding, for example, if I'm overriding a vanilla item to be repairable by a repair kit, these are the different repair kit IDs that correspond to the item in game. And this is how you would apply it to the item or add that repair kit to the item. In fact, this should really say this. And I'll explain why in my overriding tutorial. Rotation flags is how your item spawns in game in terms of its orientation. So if you had rotate back is one of the most common used flags, rotation flags in the CPP files of vanilla items. This will spawn the item on its back. And what back, front, top, left is all defined by how your model is oriented in the DayZ model editor or object builder. So that's again an advanced concept that we'll go over in a future video. So that'll do it for the CPP file overview. In these next lessons, we'll start to break down the script file structure, string tables, inputs, and how to actually use some of these definitions in game, playing our own sound files and so on.